This show is currently called Where Did It Start? I don't know if you caught the episode the other day with Anthony Iapoce, but that's what he named it. And we're doing this every Monday and Thursday for the Scouts organization, which you know something about. And you today are our exciting guest, Joe Rigoli. You are you're a pro scout for the St. Louis Cardinals. You've been with the Cardinals for over 30 years. You took a brief stint. You went to the Phillies. You were the bullpen coach there, minor league player, coach, manager. So introduce yourself to everybody, and how did you get involved with the Scouts?
Hi, yeah, my name is Joe Rigoli, and this year, 2020, marks my 38th year with the St. Louis Cardinals organization and 42 years in baseball. But it seems like it's flown by. I think Billy mentioned that, just how fast it seems the years fly by. So it's hard to believe that. I've done a lot of things in baseball and look forward to, possibly sharing a memory or two and go from there.
Sounds good to me. For everybody that's joining in, if you have any questions for Joe, you can there's a little question mark at the bottom. You can type them in the comments and we'll make sure to get to them for everybody. So before we jump into it, Joe, there are some fun and inventive minor league names. There's a company that helps name minor league teams. So the Erie Seawolves, the Lakewood Blue Claws in New Jersey, the San Antonio Missions. So Where Did It Start by Anthony Iapoce had a good run, but what do you think we should call the show today?
I think that I've actually listened, and it's something that I think about each time it's been named, and I'll have to do some more thinking. And if I have one by the end of the show, I like it. It's a show mostly about baseball people, so it's not limited to scouts. So it could be Blast from the Past. It could be, we've had a lot of different things that, a lot of suggestions, that were made, and I think that they're all good. And I just, it's hard to come up with that one name that's going to encompass, everybody. But I've thoroughly enjoyed all of your productions and really enjoy listening to the writers, and how they got their start and how they ended up in, writing for sports in general and then baseball. I know that when we get together, I enjoy talking with one of our, Lee Lowenfish, and he's an outstanding writer, and the pieces that he puts together. And I know one of our, our scouts who's from the Bronx, lives in Maryland, Ron Rizzi. He writes articles. I enjoy reading those. He sends them out. So I do enjoy that.
I think that the writers enjoy you guys just as much. They've all said it. They didn't know what they would do without the Scouts. So we'll come back to the title. I wrote some of the ones you said down. Maybe we'll pick a favorite at the end. So you're the president of the Scouts Association. How did that happen? You've been there for a while. So how did you get into scouting? And we'll talk about the organization in a minute.
No, that's great. No, I have been president, of the New York Pro Scouts Association. It's something that I do enjoy doing, but I'm very proud of it. I've known scouts virtually my entire adult life, and certainly some as a teenager. I went to my first tryout camp run by scouts as a sophomore in high school. It was at Hinchcliffe Stadium in Paterson, New Jersey. Gil Bassetti ran it. Ralph DeLullo, as you've heard his name mentioned, especially from all of us. It was there. I was a 10th grader, so what's that, about 16 years old when I was introduced to scouts, and I certainly held them all up, in high esteem. And I was thrilled and honored to be going to a tryout camp. And I can remember being there and certainly being in awe of the scouts who were dressed in their uniforms, and so they all had Dodger uniforms on. But I was also in awe of the fact that there were a lot of good ball players at the camp. And even though I was only a sophomore and enjoyed going there were older people, there were some college kids, and certainly, there were a lot of good players. And then the second one I went to, I was invited by Pete Smith, who was a part-time scout with the Mets, up to stadium up in Kingston, New York, and once again went there as well. So to another scout. So I'm used to the tryout camps, but Ralph DeLullo was certainly somebody that I still hold in high esteem. All the scouts, but I got a chance to do that. And in fact, when I was offered my first scouting job, and I really, I was scratching my head and what to do with it, the first person I called was Ralph DeLulo. And I says, hey, I've just been offered a scouting job. What do you think? And the first thing I remember him saying was, oh, that's terrific. Congratulations. And knowing that Ralph never had a negative thing to say about anything, I still wanted some more feedback. And he says, oh, Joe, he says, that's quite an honor. You're going to be going out. And when you're on the field, I was a minor league manager for a while. I was going to only be as good as the players that the scouts sent me. But as a scout, you and now are going to evaluate players and decide if you thought that they had the tools to play not only Major League Baseball, but were you able to get them a chance to be with the St. Louis Cardinals organization? So I kind of had that dual responsibility of, hey, are these the kind of players that we want to bring into the organization? So I take that very seriously. I took it seriously then, and I take my job seriously now.
So what do you think that the big picture that the Scouts organization is trying to do within the industry, but also for the community in New York and the surrounding area baseball-wise?
I think that's a great question, and I think that it's evolved. You know, I wasn't around at the beginning of the organization, but when I was managing in the organization, in the minor leagues, I was in the wintertime, I got introduced to the organization through Ralph DeLulo and Pete Smith and people like that. And we used to hold free baseball clinics at a number of high schools within the area in the wintertime with Herbie Stein. And, you know, Billy was there. And I used to do the catching with Jim Quigley and Joe DeLuca, who sadly passed away recently. So, you know, it was started out by that. And then, you know, it used to be very difficult to get into the organization. I mean, there were votes and things like that. And I never forget the logo of the New York Proud Scouts Association, where it said friendship and sociability. And there were other people that were being, you know, joined, and it was really a wonderful fraternity, which it still is. But I think that, you know, over the years, we've tried to come up with, in our meetings, we've always gotten ideas. And one of them is this, what you're doing right now, is to, you know, get on the technology, the social media. That's been a big part, getting a Facebook page, getting Gary Perone's been, you know, involved in getting us into social media and, you know, kind of bringing the organization slowly along in that so we can grow the organization. We now have, over the past 4 or 5 years, women have been in there because there's always been that, what do you do at the meetings? Well, I said, well, the meetings are great, except at the end of the meeting, we have a big cake brought in and the girls pop out of the cake, you know, but now we have to stop that part.
So we had some questions here. We'll start taking a couple audience questions. So Christy Ackert says, what is the most important advice you gave your daughter when she embarked on her career as a scout?
Boy, that's a great question right off the bat. But one of the things I did tell her, I said, look, you're going to have to do this because, number one, you want to be involved in the game and you want to do it, and you're going to have to knock on the doors. That I appreciate the fact, you should appreciate the fact that, yes, your father is in the game, but it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to do internships, very oftentimes not paid. You're going to have to, you know, I can certainly, if I'm there, I can introduce you to people that might be in the game, and you have to let people know. It's really no different than I tell people that ask me that I'm not related to, that, you know, it's not easy. And you are going to have to knock on doors. You're going to have to hear no's. And she heard no's, and she heard, and in fact, she heard the same things that I was told, that a lot of people are told. Well, you know, very difficult to get in. There's a small number, but you know, you do have to keep on pounding and knocking the door, and sometimes work for, you know, very little money, if nothing. I know she started out with the Hudson Valley Renegades as an intern, so she was traveling 70, 75 miles a day, you know, to go up there, you know. So she did 3 or 4 internships, and you know, was fortunate enough to land a job. She even interned with the Mets, and I can proudly say that she did it on her own. She went to the winter meetings, and I wasn't even there at the winter meetings. I wasn't invited at the time. It was just the front offices. She went to the job seminars. She went, you know, and she did all the interviews. So I'm really proud of her. I mean, obviously she carries my last name, so some people will say, do you have a father that's a scout? And you know, of course she'll tell them that she does, but I'm proud of the fact that she's really done it, a lot by herself. And I think that I've always said, this has been a male-dominated game, but there are so many roles for women. It's now approached the baseball development side. I think the St. Louis Cardinals have been not only an advocate of women and getting into baseball. This year, we had a woman as one of our fourth coaches in the minor leagues. So they're now breaking that barrier to get onto the field and, not just be a front office position or in the back or working in the marketing department or any other department. They're now, and I think that's wonderful. Not because I have a daughter, but, baseball is a game that's shared. Why would you want to alienate yourself from half the population of the world?
It's a very good question. And I think people in baseball are starting to figure that out. So we're talking about the scouting element of things, but before we get back to that, your son, Matt, was also drafted twice. And so you've got that element of things, played in the minors for the Cardinals. So what does baseball mean to you and your family? And as a dad, what has that been like for you?
Well, I can only, in my perspective as both a baseball person and a father, and what baseball means to me is that it's been my career, it's been my life, it's what I fed my family with, and I think over the years though I've come to give it the respect that it deserves. I've always respected the job, but I hope it doesn't define myself. And I think in some people's eyes, it probably does. Well, that's Joe Rigoli, he's a baseball scout, but I'd rather be known as maybe a good citizen, a good person. And by the way, he also works in baseball, and I think that, over the years, I think you mature as an adult, and I'm very, very happy for what baseball has provided me and my family. And I'm happy that I've gotten involved in scouting. I'm happy I've gotten involved in every aspect of the game. And so what does baseball mean to me? I'm happy that my children have gotten a chance to experience it. I know my daughter's choosing it right now as a career, and that, who knows what the future holds. That was one of the things people always said, I do set goals for myself, but I was never, in this game, it's very difficult to say, well, in 10 years, I'm going to do this, or in 15 years, you sort of, ride the wave, I guess, when you want to say, there's going to be some ups, there's going to be some downs, and, but you can still enjoy the ride.
So as far as the scouting element goes, I don't know, people probably know it, but don't realize they know it. You were associated with that whole brain trust that went to the Houston Astros. They started with the Cardinals with Jeff Lunau, and really all of the guys who have moved on now with the Orioles, with the Astros. So you were a part of the scouting side of things that helped create that whole department before it gained all the notoriety that it did. Can you just talk about working with that group? What did they have right? And we'll get into balance as far as analytics and the human element, but let's just talk about them first as a group.
Well, I'm not going to so much get into the Houston situation, or
right,
things like that. Right. No, and I know you didn't ask that, but, I think they were one of the people that were in the forefront of the analytics. And, and I think that sometimes, we think there was a number of clubs at the time. However, I don't think that all 30 clubs had specifically an analytics department. And I think that now all 30 teams have an analytics department. And basically the premise that it was brought on was, in the past, or can past performance help you predict future success? And I think that's the whole premise of it. Can we learn from the statistics? Can we learn from the analytics and try to predict future success? So I think that group, certainly, did that, and it did that with the Cardinals. And I think that the particular time that they became with us, I think that one of the things that made us successful, that they weren't so much beating over our heads, but hey, look, let's get a new way of looking at things. And certainly they brought some ideas that were different, but I don't think that that group or the people that were involved in there ever did lose the human part of it. They definitely wanted your opinion. They wanted to marry the two. In fact, we even came out with a number that we called it a stout score. And the stout was a mixture of the two words, statistic and scout. So, I mean, they really tried to bridge that gap. Certainly, you know, anytime you bring up an idea, you know, it's why they call it out of the box thinking. Let's hear it. Let's, and that's how great inventions are done. That's how, great things in society are done, is thinking outside the box. And they did start their careers with St. Louis. I think that we had good drafts, but it wasn't strictly because, we had the best analytic department or something like that, because the one thing that we always did every year was lessons learned. What can we learn from what we did wrong? And can we incorporate other ideas to make those, make it better the following year? And I think that that's lost in that. And I'm not speaking on the behalf of other organizations, but I do think that other organizations are adopting the fact that we need to marry the two. Otherwise I think we'll end up seeing a game where, we have a table at home plate and each person runs out, and we might as well just have computers at the game and roll the dice and go back to playing Stratomatic, and not actually play the game. So, I mean, I think the people that, maybe you're talking about, or the advent of the statistical analysis, is that the clubs that can find and integrate both, the human part of it and the statistical part and the analytic part of it, and marry those two together, I think are going to be very successful clubs. And I think we've done that. We've continued that as well.
Talk to me about maybe what a future for that looks like. You and I were talking before, and Lee Lowenfish, you mentioned, sent an article earlier in the day to me that was written in 2001. And it's sort of like this conversation just happens over and over, where there is the scouting element of things, and maybe it's changing and people are afraid it's going to be phased out. So what does the future look like with scouts, with analytics, and how do we keep moving it forward? You're someone who always wants to adapt and learn and grow. So
I think your last sentence really kind of says it all. And that is, learn to adapt, learn to grow. Maybe we don't like where we're growing, I'm not sure, but things like that. But I think that, to discard the human aspect would be totally wrong. And to think that statistics do not, or the analytics do not play a part, would be totally wrong. I mean, if I went into a draft and we had no scouts and I said, well, we're going to take, this player, he's the top guy on our list, he's never lost a college game and things like that. And then, he's on the top of our list. Well, lo and behold, if we took him, maybe that person got sick and passed away. I don't know. Why is he on the top of the list? Because the computer says that he's 8-0 and he's got a 1 point. Yeah, but he just left the country, or, you don't have the human aspect. Anytime you're using a computer model, we used to have arguments in the draft room. The computer, or the algorithms would print out this guy and things like that. And the human element would have their say. The only thing about when you argued about a player, you could probably convince the other side. It was just difficult that when I argued with a computer, the computer never spoke back to me, and I couldn't, it was tough to convince that argument, that the player that, we like this way or something like that. And that's, but see, here's an example. That's not uncommon. I think we've seen that anytime you use a model, and we've done that through this whole pandemic, that it could be wrong, because the model is only what you feed into it. And I understand that. Some people getting angry that the models are wrong. Well, you know what? When they ran the simulation, it wasn't. The models are going to get better. It's the same way in the weather. When they predict the hurricanes and you watch all the different lines. Well, the more hurricanes we have and the more data that gets put in there, the models will get better. And I guess my point being is that, the statistical models and all the different leagues, they're getting better. They're trying to adapt it to the different ballparks. But I don't think you could ever get away from the human aspect and the human scout and the human report and the evaluation that goes with it.
So let's now go into the Wayback Machine and go back a little bit to where you first started. you were a catcher for Fairleigh Dickinson. You're in their Hall of Fame, and you ended up with the Oakland Athletics after that. So just talk a little bit about your playing days and how that has guided you as a coach, which we'll talk about in a minute, as a scout. And for kids now, what do they need to keep in mind as they're playing and growing in their careers?
Well, I think it's difficult sometimes, not so much separate the two, but when you're a player, you always play, and it's sometimes difficult to evaluate yourself, and especially if you're having success, whether it be in high school or college or, the numbers you put in. I'm sure that there are a lot of people in their high school Hall of Fames or even their college Hall of Fames, so as a player, you're doing that. I think you can much get a better idea. I'm not saying you cannot evaluate, but you can better evaluate yourself either looking back or when you're sitting back and you're watching. So one of my managerial years, I thought were much better learning how to evaluate a player. And I managed 7 years in the minor leagues, and I remember being offered a scouting job by our scouting director who didn't know me. And I says, geez, how did this ever come about? He says, every time you talked about a player that we had in the organization, it was always positive, which I didn't even know I was doing that. I mean, he says, when we talk about a player, say, well, this player can do this and do that and really help us this way. And then if they asked about their shortcomings, I would have to say their shortcomings. But it was always, he said, and I'll never forget that because Ralph DeLulo said the same thing to me. He says, when you scout, always look for the things about a player that they can do. It's easy sometimes to figure out what they can't do. And I'll be honest with you, as a player, when I was playing, I always thought that's what one of the scouts' job was like negative, because they would always tell you what you can't do. I mean, because I would ask him, I said, what do you want me to do? He says, well, you need to throw the ball better. Well, then I worked on my throwing to make it better. And then you go back and say, am I throwing better? Oh, yeah, you're throwing better. Well, you need to run better. So I'd work on my running. So I said, well, maybe that's their job, to figure out what you can't do. And then I started to really get involved in the evaluating. And I think that the better scouts, all scouts to me are good. But I think that one of the things that young scouts, what we need to do is look at a player, and first thing you should ask is, what can they do? Not what can't they do. And I think that will help anybody in a better scouting. Hey, look, even as a pitcher, what can he do? Can he get guys out? Does he have a good fastball? Does he have a good breaking ball? But because a lot of times it's easy, to be able to say, well, he can't do this, or he can't hit for power, or that can sometimes, that usually reveals itself. But find out what he can do, and I think that those abilities or attributes can be developed over time and by doing a lot of watching, and then learning that way. But as a player, I think you're always involved in the actual playing of the game, and even sometimes as a manager, that's one of the things also. I mean, managers sometimes they trade for players, and they say, well, why'd you get that player? Well, because every time we played them, they really beat us up. But then you realize that when they got them, they weren't. They now lost the club that they beat up on. Now they weren't, but they didn't hit against anybody else, but they beat up on your club. So sometimes you get wrapped up into only things that happen to you. And I think scouting was one of those professions that really opened my eyes early on, because I would be going to different ballparks every day and seeing different players and then comparing the two. And I think sometimes that gets lost in it.
You were a catcher, and I think we've seen, over the last few years, catchers just make good managers. There's a lot of Mike Matheny, Brad Ausmus, and you could go on and on and on. But what is it about the thought process playing as a catcher that translates well over the game managing aspect? Can you just kind of talk about that from both sides?
Yeah, I would, having been a catcher, I would send, you might be a little bit surprised by my answer here, because I think that in general, I like to say that that's true. And I think in the past, it has been, in a sense, true. And I think that one of the reasons, the main reason, is the relationship between a catcher and a pitcher. And pitching is such a big part of our game that catchers would understand the thinking, maybe more understand the thinking of a pitcher, or things like that. You're involved in every pitch. You're involved in actually, when you talk about the meetings of how we're going to approach, how we're going to pitch these guys and things like that. So I think that they're exposed to that more often. The surprise that I'm going to add to that answer is that not necessarily true, especially in today's game. I mean, you have a lot of players that are not pitchers that are excellent managers. The winner of the World Series last year, Dave Martinez. Aaron Boone, excellent manager. He came after Joe Girardi, who was a former catcher, who I think is an excellent manager. So you're seeing the Mets have now a new manager, in Luis Rojas. You've seen pitchers. I think now the job of a manager has evolved. It's changed. You have to be a very good people person. You have to be the idea of a manager in almost like a business manager. You have to be able to deal with a lot of personalities. And I think that that idea of maybe the catchers, there are catchers out there that are good managers and have played the position of catcher. But I think they better have also the people skills and the interactive skills to be able to manage people. And I think that's so I think that might, I'm not going to say it's been changing, but you can see that there are a lot of successful managers that necessarily are not catchers. And then they have been in the past as well. I mean, Gil Hodges was not a catcher, but I think he had a catcher as his bench coach, so, and certainly, Joe Torre started out as a catcher, and then he was a first baseman and a third baseman. So I'm just, going off the top of my head about managers. But I think that I think we can all say that the job of manager has evolved over the last 10, 15 years.
So let's get a couple.
How's that?
That was great. You're always right on the ball. So let's get another couple audience questions. Sean Clancy asked a Jay Horowitz story from Fairleigh Dickinson, if you have one.
Jay Horowitz, yes, he was the sports information director at Fairleigh Dickinson. And I want to tell you something about Jay, because he's had a long career with the New York Mets. And Jay's a wonderful person. And he was the hardest working person that I've ever been associated with, especially at Fairleigh Dickinson. And, his job of a sports information director, he's in charge of all the sports. But I think his first love was baseball. He spent a lot of time with us. He did all the books. He scored the games. And back then there weren't computers. And he also wrote stories. And, he became national about writing stories. And he would take ball players that were on the stories that had interesting backgrounds, not just in baseball. We had people that played the piano. There were people who raised pets. But he was able to get FDU in the newspaper, and he was widely known. And I think when they say there are plenty of Jay Horowitz stories, but Jay was also not only a terrific writer and a terrific sports information director, he was a great fan as well. He always wanted people to do well. And, Jay has gone on to big and better things with the Mets, and he's a terrific person.
We got another question here from Dan Palumbo. Do you ever miss the amateur side of scouting, not the travel, the bad fields, but finding somebody?
Yeah, no, I do. I think that's a great question because, there's two aspects of scouting, and one of them is the amateur side and one of them is the professional side. And the amateur side is the high schools and the colleges. And I did like that. And I did it for many years, over 20 years. And the traveling, I'm not going to say that it was getting to me because I think that's part of the job. You accept that. And I do plenty of traveling as a pro scout. Although when I'm as a pro scout, when you go to see a team, you typically stay for 5 days. When I tell that to people, they would say, why 5 days? Well, I get to see all 5 starting pitchers. Everybody has a 5-man rotation. And within those 5 days, you usually see the entire bullpen. But an amateur scout, I can remember being in 6 different cities in 6 different days, especially if you're cross-checking. One day, in the Northeast, next day in Florida, next day in the Carolinas, and you're bouncing around. I think at the time that I went to pro scouting and I was offered that, I wanted a new challenge, And I thought that if we made a trade based on my recommendation, that it would affect the big club, the major league team, sooner. When I love scouting the free agents and the amateurs, but you also realize that usually it would take 3 or 4 years for that prospect to get to the major leagues and to maybe have an impact on the club. And so people always say, maybe what would you like, more or better? I whatever job they'd like me to do. If they wanted me to go see a player that was an amateur, I would do that as well. It was always great to do that. I always say that I was fortunate, very lucky enough that my first draft choice that I ever drafted, that ever had my name on, got to the major leagues and pitched for a long time. And I'm very happy about that and proud of that. And he was actually Canadian born, and he was inducted into the Canadian Hall of Fame. And in his speech, he mentioned the fact that I had signed him and scouted him, so it was very nice.
Let's take that leeway. Let's talk about some of the players that you've signed and coached over the years: Matt Morris, Jason Mott, Joe McEwing. So I'll let you go. Talk about just some of those guys and the experiences that you had with them. What's the relationship like between a player and a scout, too, that you're scouting and that you sign?
Well, I think it's always a good relationship. There's always a bond there. It's very similar to when you play on a team that wins a championship. You cannot see that same teammate for years and years, and then you can reconnect, and there's always that bond that brings you together as a championship club. So I do hear from players, and some players I haven't heard from in a long time. But when they do, if we ever meet, there's always that bond that they know that I got them their start in the game. And like I say, my first draft was Rael Cormier. He was the first player that I ever signed. He was a 6th round draft choice out of the Community College of Rhode Island. And so Rael and I talked this past spring. He's had some health challenges that I pray for every day, that he's doing better. But, there were times where, broken up, that we hadn't spoken to each other in a while. But that's because family and life, kind of get in the way of that. But there are players that I hear from. I get a Christmas card every year, and there's some minor league players that will also send me a Christmas card. And I was down in spring training this year that I signed a minor league player, and I've been asking about him. Geez, I know he lives in Florida. And I don't know if it got back to him, but all of a sudden, before this pandemic, raised itself, I got a phone call, and it was so nice to hear from him. But it was even nicer that he says, I want to thank you for everything you did for me, because if it wasn't for me getting an opportunity, I would not have the life that I have now. And what he does is he runs rehab clinics, and mostly a lot of players use him to help rehab their post surgeries. And we plan on getting together when I get back down to Florida. And he played for Long Island University. And like I say, so that bond is always there, even if we haven't spoken in a while, but I'm very proud of some of the players that I've gotten. You mentioned Jason Mott, and Jason is a great story, because Jason had probably the best arm that I've ever seen, in a catcher, and I was a catcher, but he had struggles. I had a real good feeling. I don't want to say I knew, but I had a very good feeling that he would struggle with the bat. And he struggled with the bat in college, and it kind of made sense that he would probably struggle, in the minor leagues. But I always had in the back of my mind that, the mound, the pitcher, might be one place where, he might have a chance. But I definitely wanted him to go out as a catcher. But when I signed him, I told him that, in my report, that if catching didn't work out, that he should, try the mound. And then we took him in the 19th round, and he went out and caught for a couple of years. And I'll never forget, his second year out, he was a catcher in the Florida State League, and he hit like about a 190 or 180, sub 200. But he was voted by the managers as the best catching prospect that, that was in that league because of his defensive skills. But we stuck with him as a catcher. I think he maybe got to Double-A, but then we had approached him that it was time to maybe try the mound. And he did try the mound, and he was very successful. And I have here a magazine from 2011, which has Jason Mott on the cover. Yep. He recorded the last out in the 2011 World Series. So, Jason went on to do some coaching, I think, in Memphis. But he's, we still, converse now and then. But a scout and a player will always have a relationship, and regardless if I don't talk to him for years and years, and we'll run into each other, that bond gets reconnected.
So that's the perfect example of what you were talking about. You're looking for what a player can do. You saw something in him. You had a hunch maybe it wasn't going to work out in one way, but you did see something. How do you know when to stick with the guy versus maybe suggesting it is what it is? We've had these conversations with everybody, self-identifying that maybe it isn't going to work. How do you know when to stick with a guy?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I don't think that that's totally put on a scout. I mean, a scout can certainly in an organizational meeting make a suggestion, or that, hey, this player can also do other things. You mentioned Joe McEwing, who I'm extremely proud of. Not only signing him and things like that, but the success that he's had, and his name has often been brought up about managing careers.
Right.
When I signed Joey was a shortstop at Morris County College, which is only about 8 miles away from my house. But I even said when I signed him that I said, Joe, I look at you more in the future as a second baseman. And I said, I got that in my report that, but that doesn't mean you won't, you could stay at shortstop and you might end up doing that. But if they move you, don't be surprised. Well, when I signed players, often when I was an amateur scout, I would call them after a week or so when they got settled. And I would give them a call and say, hey, did you get in okay? Well, our team was out in Arizona that year. First time we had a team out in Arizona. So when he got out there, I called him. I said, Joe, how's everything going? You all settled in? He says, yeah, no, everything's great. Thanks a lot. And everything terrific. I said, well, I was kind of interested. Hey, well, Joe, where are you playing? So he said, center field. I looked at the phone. I said, center field? Nowhere. He says, yeah. He says, they center field they hadn't signed yet. They asked who wants to play center field. I said, I raised my hand. We had enough infielders. So I says, I bring that story up. It's an interesting story, but what was Joe McEwing known for? Super Joe.
Versatility.
He could play his versatility. In fact, when we needed, if Mark McGuire would be taken out in the 7th inning for defense, Joe would even play first.
Yeah.
So, and when we first got him, his 4th year or so, they wanted to take him to the instructional league to make him the 3rd possible catcher in case two guys got hurt at the same time. So his versatility was his strength. Now, I can't say that I ever saw him play the outfield, but I did think that he could become a middle infielder. So I think when a scout should look at a player, if they knock him out for a position, just should ask yourself, well, can he do something else? And maybe he cannot in that scout's mind. And that's okay, and because another thing is sometimes you think that there's going to be a group of players, universal, that all scouts may like. But then you have to scout for your organization. So I can see a player and say, well, that might be a player that Boston may like, or a power hitter that maybe is not the best runner, and playing the National League, you're going to need some foot speed, unless you're just an outstanding hitter, So, I mean, but if you look at a player and you evaluate a player, you should say, well, what's his strengths and what's his weaknesses, and can he be moved? And that's a lot of times that's also in the professional life as well, not baseball, but in all life. Maybe that is finding the fit for that person to the right job. So, maybe if he's not a good writer, then we shouldn't put him in the writing department, maybe, but he fits somewhere else in the department. And that's basically when you're scouting, that if it's okay not to like a player, but before you say, no, I don't like him, can that player do something else?
So you briefly left the Cardinals for a couple of years. You worked with some pretty well-known guys as the managers with the Phillies. You're with Jim Fregosi, and then Terry Francona. So what was I think the bullpen coach is like the most overlooked coach on the coaching staff. People don't hear too much about the bullpen coach. So what was that job like? What was it like working with those guys? Why did you leave and why did you come back?
Well, I left I think it's every person's goal is to get to major leagues. And I had an opportunity. Lee Thomas was the farm director. Was the general manager of the Phillies, and Jim Fregosi, who I worked for in 1985 as a coach in Louisville when we were in AAA together. Jim was I managed for 6 and I coached 1 year. So, but I was on the field for 8. So in '85. Jim was the manager of the Louisville Redbirds, and I was his coach. And then, again, dial the clock up 11 years, their bullpen coach, Mike Ryan, had retired, and there was an opportunity. I think everybody's dream is to get to the major leagues, and that was my goal. And I was scouting at the time and got offered the position. And to say that it was an easy yes, it wasn't. I loved the Cardinals. I've been there for 15 years. So it was something that I struggled with, but it was something that I did want to do. And I looked at that time that I thought that there was a good mixture of young and old, and there was a plan for getting better. And so I made that move. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. When I say it didn't work out, we lost. We had 2 bad losing seasons, and we had injuries. And the injuries we had at that time, good sized payrolls, but a lot of our star players were hurt, and so we when things happen like that, they, we paid the price for losing. And so I will say this, I never left on bad terms with the Cardinals. They understood going to the major leagues. And, at that time in 1995, we were just sold. Anheuser-Busch sold the Cardinals. We had new ownership coming in, and I kind of read it maybe it was a time to try something. And then when that didn't, the Cardinals had called, and they definitely wanted me. They said they wanted me to to come back, and they gave me a lot of time to think about it. When I say think about it, I was waiting, and I was interviewed by a number of clubs for a number of positions, but I certainly had the affinity for the Cardinals, and they had called right away the very next day that they found out that there were changes being made in Philadelphia. And so they the following year, they did a wonderful thing for me. I still wanted to be a little bit on the field, and that was I scouted, and in the summertime, I was the pitching coach for our New York Penn League club, which at that time was in New Jersey, was in Sparta, New Jersey. So I could live at home, and I could also go there. So it was an easy call to come back to the Cardinals and do that for a while. And then that morphed into, strictly scouting and then pro scouting. So, things happen along the way. They say things happen for a reason, and they do. I can remember back when I first took the scouting job, and I was the scouting director by the name of Fred McAllister. And, Fred McAllister kind of gets, people don't say, oh, geez, who's Fred McAllister? Well, Fred McAllister worked for one organization, the St. Louis Cardinals, for over 60 years. And he was the one who offered me my first scouting job. And I remember we were having lunch, and he was saying that, he was, I guess he was making his pitch. I'm not, sometimes I don't recognize it, but he was saying, I think you'd like scouting, you'd be good at it. He says, and you're never going to be rich, when you scout, because you're not going to get paid the most and all that stuff, And although I was never, a dollar sign guy or an ego, he said, but I think you'll like it. And Freddie passed away, and went to his funeral in his wake. And if he were sitting with me now, I'd tell him he was wrong. I said, Freddie, you told me I would never be rich. I says, I'm so much richer a person for having scouted. The people that I have met, the families that I've met to sign players, the players that I've met could never compare, to other things that I value. And I would tell them that today.
That's beautiful stuff, and it's very you. And I think that all the guys in the organization say the same thing. When you get into scouting, it becomes a family, and the players, the people you work with, all of that. So I heard you pitched BP, and one of those 2 years, the All-Star game was at the Vet, and so you pitched BP in the Home Run Derby. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. Now, 1996. In today's world, they bring their own thrower, and things like that. I've always had a good arm. I've always been able to throw good batting practice and long batting practice. Make a long story short, in 1996, the All-Star game was held at the Vet in Philadelphia. So I was employed to work the All-Star game, and as far as the Home Run Derby and bullpen catcher, for the team, but not officially. So I'm not on the program. But for that day, we had 4 people that were scheduled to throw batting practice. Me, Dave Cash, who was also on the coaching staff, a left-handed pitcher by the name of Steve Toller, who threw batting practice, and Del Unser. 4 of us, and he was another left-handed thrower. Well, we were all getting suited up for the event, and all of a sudden, the producer or whoever, director, or comes in and says, "Oh, by the way, none of the players want any left-handed throwers." So we looked at each other, because all of a sudden our staff went from 4 guys to 2, me and Dave Cash. And so we looked at each other, and I said, "Look, Dave," I says, "I'll go for as long as I can go, and then go from there." So I started it off, and there were different formats back then. So there was a packed house of 60,000 and in the Vet, and I threw for about an hour and a half. And if you go back on that date, it was about 95 degrees, and the carpet was, it was a difficult thing. And you had an earpiece in listening to the broadcast, because you would get in a rhythm, but you had to wait for the home run to be called and all that, and I can remember, the producer behind home plate, giving the okay, "You're doing great," but I could have loved a drink of water because it was really hot. I'm sure it's on YouTube.
It's like live theater. It's like
yeah. People have said that they've seen it on YouTube or whatever. You can do all that now. But it was a great experience, and it was a great an opportunity that again to do and to be involved. And if you did look at it, you may not recognize me. My hair was a lot darker.
You had the mustache.
I had a mustache. So they might say that's not Joe, but
if you Google Joe, all of his baseball cards, he has the mustache too. It's a good one. All right, so let's do rapid fire. I'm going to ask you a couple things. Tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. So, best thing about New Jersey?
The best thing about New Jersey, it's a beautiful state. I went to school in the state, and what happens is that people, they fly into the airport and they see all the oil tanks, and all the industrial part of the state. But west and north and south, it's a beautiful state. It's got everything that you have to offer. You have easy access to New York City, and if I travel an hour west, I'm in Pennsylvania and can do all the things you can do in the wide spaces of Pennsylvania. So it's really been a great place. I've raised my family here, and I've enjoyed living here.
Favorite baseball player growing up?
That, without question, was Mickey Mantle. My first glove was Mickey Mantle. I remember sending in cigar wrappers from my grandfather and buying my first glove was a Mickey Mantle glove. I still have his picture on my downstairs and on my dresser or my little memorabilia case. And he's up there, and it was funny. Bob Costas carries his card around, and you hear all the different stories. But I was such a huge Mickey Mantle fan. I was actually in Port St. Lucie in August when he passed away. I think it was August 10th, but I'm not sure. But that date. But I was covering the Port St. Lucie Mets, and following Mickey's progression of his illnesses, and when he passed away, my wife called me and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I'm okay." It was just checking up on me, make sure I was okay, because my idol. I will say this, not to say anything about Mickey Mantle, because I never got a chance to meet him, but I did have another kind of idol, and that was Tom Seaver. I grew up in Queens, and the Mets became a big part, and I always loved, Tom Terrific and watching him. When I was in Little League pitching, I would try to emulate Tom Seaver. And of course, hitting, I always wanted to be Mickey Mantle and also even switch hit a couple times. So those were my boyhood idols.
Would you rather be able to fly or be invisible?
I've heard you ask that question. You know what? Those are pretty good things right there, but I think more fly, because you're more adventuresome. I'm not looking to be invisible to where I have people that can watch and hear talk bad about me. I don't know.
Favorite snack?
Oh, wow. It's probably more dessert. I mean, I'm an ice cream guy. I mean, I like ice cream. So, that's probably more than, like a snack. So,
favorite mascot in baseball?
Wow. That's good. I guess I have to say Fred Bird because of the Cardinals, but that Philly Fanatic is pretty good, pretty funny.
You did very well on that. So next thing is going to be baseball cards. I'm going to show you a couple of people. You tell me the first thing that comes to your mind about the players, okay?
Okay.
First one is Curt Schilling.
Curt Schilling is a workhorse. He was the ace of our staff in Philadelphia and an outstanding pitcher. I mean, you could always rely on him to take the ball. He's also, he fought through injuries. He fought through surgeries. And I think anybody in baseball would tell you he was a very big game pitcher, And so that's what I can say about Curt.
The catcher, Mike Lieberthal.
Mike was a very, very was a very, very talented player that I'm very happy to have watch him develop. He came up as a rookie, and in '96 he was the backup catcher to Benito Santiago. And it's very difficult for a rookie to take over in a major city. And Mike was propelled into that job, and there was a lot of people that questioned his abilities, and that was unfortunate early on in his career. And it was funny because I used to tell people, well, you're going to get on the rookie for the rookie mistakes that he was making, and that's fine. However, if you put him on the trade market, you're going to have 25 teams looking to trade for him. And that was always the case. Anytime they asked anybody, one of the first few players they would ask for was Mike Lieberthal. And Mike was a very, very talented catcher with a strong arm and a good bat as well.
Next one with the Cardinals, David Freese, the hero.
Well, he came over with us with a trade, and he's still playing. So obviously, that I didn't see him play in the minor leagues, but he was certainly a strong right-handed bat that was a World Series hero for us. Absolutely.
Jose Oquendo.
Jose Oquendo, a wonderful man. Jose Oquendo was a very, very smart baseball man. He played for the Mets as a 19-year-old. And then he also, when I was a coach in Louisville, he was with the Cardinals in 1985. And I got to know Joe, Jose played all different positions for us. And he always had the will to win, switch hitter, terrific infielder. And he's now, he coached third base. I was his pitching coach in 1998 in New Jersey. And we got along great there. And, Joe went from managing the rookie club, the New York Penn League club, to being a coach with the major league team. And he was there at third base for about 10 or 12 years. He's now in the minor leagues, and he's a terrific teacher. He gets all of our infielders ready. And, Joe's a great baseball person, and like I say, he's been with the Cardinals a very long time, started with the Mets, and he's now teaching, the game to our young players in the minor leagues.
Last one, Scott Rowland.
Scott Rowland. Oh, what a wonderful person he is. Scott Rowland was a rookie in 1996. He came up with the Philadelphia Phillies. I've thrown many batting practices to Scott Rowland. And when he came over to the Cardinals, and like we talk about that bond, every time if I got a chance to see Scott, he always came over and would give me a hug and always remember our time with the Phillies. And of course, his years with the Cardinals, and I think he was the rookie of the year with the Phillies, I believe, in 1997. if I'm not mistaken. And it was funny because in September, he was brought up in 1996. And if you go back, he was actually at bat that if he would have completed the at bat, he would have been, he would not have been a rookie in 1997. But that at bat, he was hit by a pitch and he broke his arm.
Oh, jeez.
And yeah, and the pitcher who broke his arm was Matt Morris. So I don't know if I ever told him that I signed the guy that hit him and broke his arm, but it made him eligible for Rookie of the Year in 1997.
Talk about service time manipulation. So we got just a couple minutes left. Something that we've been talking to everybody about is the pandemic and how they've been dealing with it. So with the 4 minutes or so we got, where were you, and what's been your favorite thing that's happened since you've been at home?
Well, it happened obviously in Florida. I'll never forget when it happened. I mean, March 11th, I remember the date because I was watching the television. My wife was with me in the room, and they had just canceled the NCAA, the basketball, and they just canceled the Utah basketball game, the professional game. And I told my wife right there, I says, this doesn't look good. I says, we have 5,000 to 10,000 people in a ballpark. This is going to really be something that's going to affect us. Well, the very next morning we got the phone call that we were to stop going to games and that we would probably be leaving at our convenience. It just so happens I was in Jupiter, Florida, so I explained to my boss that I would stay around for another 3 or 4 days because my daughter was in Jupiter with the Marlins. And so it was a very fluid situation. Every day there was something new that was, coming to light. And then once we realized it was going to be extended time, they were closing the camps. We decided to come up. It was either stay in Florida with her or come to our home. But she was given the okay to even go back home as long as she had her computer to do work. She would come with us. So it worked out. She was able to come back up with us, and we've been here. As far as it's been a tough time for everybody, and I think we owe a debt, a congratulatory, a big thank you to all of the workers and the first responders, the nurses, the doctors that are on the front lines combating this for us, really. And I hope and pray that there's a swift end to this pandemic. As far as being home, it's probably a better question to ask my wife. I think that, I feel like I get in a way, a lot of times here at home. I'm not usually home for that long a time, but I think that it's been, the social distancing has been easier the longer I stay home. So she stays away and I stay away, no, it's been a different experience for us all. We've never been through this. However, we have to realize that everybody's in this situation. The world is in this situation. And it is my prayer that we can get a swift end to this pandemic. I think we all realize that our lives are going to be somewhat altered and changed, but it's my hope that we can get to a more, what we consider to be, life the way it was beforehand. We can get back to playing baseball, scouting baseball, enjoying our lives, and not being worried about, the virus that's wreaking havoc on our society right now.
100%. We've got 25 seconds left. So you answered, what does baseball mean to you in the middle? That was perfect. So let's pick a title. You said Blast from the Past, Baseball People. Someone said Rapping with Rigoli. What do you want the title to be?
Well, I kind of like something there with that Baseball People.